Welcome to the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin's What is Spirituality podcast. Your host, Steve Spilde, is the Associate Director at the center. His guests talk about their evolving understanding of God, prayer, healing, and wholeness. So tell me, who is Steve Spilde?
Steve Spilde, he is married to wife Jeanette. He is father to a daughter, Sophia. I grew up on a farm in North Dakota. After doing a couple different things, I ended up being a Lutheran pastor for a while, about 15 years. And then my wife and I adopted Sophia from China. Got home from China, quickly discovered that she had some developmental delays. She has a diagnosis of autism, and we had to rearrange our lives to take care of her. So I stayed at home with her for a period of time as a stay-at-home dad, coordinating all of her various therapies, and had to step away from parish ministry. During that time at home with my daughter, I learned a lot about myself. We ended up moving to La Crosse because of my wife's job and found my way to the Spirituality Center. Became a spiritual director and found my life's calling in that. I really enjoy meeting with people, hearing the story of their lives, and that's what I get to do. So that's who I am.
So when you spent that time at home with your daughter and you had all that time to think about things and you did some soul searching and you found out who you were, did you like who you were?
Probably not at first. I'm becoming to like who I am. I'm coming to like that person, but it's been a journey.
What did you find out most about yourself that you didn't know?
Wow. Well, my daughter, I thought that time at home was about teaching my daughter and helping her to become a good person, a healthy person who could function well when she grew up. The joke of it is that I think she's taught me a lot more than I've ever taught her. And so much of that time with her at home was really learning to accept her. Because I think when we first got the diagnosis, and I was first at home with her as a father, we were doing lots of therapy and lots of different education, trying to help her overcome her autism. I think inside of me, the goal was really to help her stop being autistic, but she can't do that. And so over time, I started to realize that, wow, my daughter is fine. She's a really cool person. The challenge was I need to learn to accept her and learn what works for her, what doesn't work for her. And the irony of it was I needed to learn those lessons for myself. So she really taught that about me. I'd spent my life up to that always trying to fit in with who other people said that I should be, who I was supposed to be, trying to hide my shortcomings and maybe exaggerate my gifts. And she really taught me some important lessons about self-acceptance. So I think I like myself a lot better than I used to, because I realized that, hey, I the person I have to live with all the time is Steve. If other people don't like that, that's their problem. I had to learn that to get along with her, and she continues to teach that to me about myself.
What drew you to work for the Franciscan Spirituality Center?
Great question. So when I first left, I took they call it a leave from call. So I was a pastor. I had to take a break from that. So I went on leave from call. And I thought that was going to be just a short time, just a year or two. We'd do a lot of therapy with Sophia. We would heal her of autism and off we would go. I mean, it sounds kind of silly and naive to say that now, but I think honestly, that's what I believed. So I thought, being at home with her would be kind of a short-term thing, but I had a lot of time. The part that I missed most about being a pastor in a parish was meeting with people one-on-one. People would come and say, Pastor, I need to talk. I'm having troubles in my marriage, or I'm having trouble with my kids, or I don't like my job, or whatever. And they would schedule an appointment, and we would sit and talk, and I would listen to them. And then at the end of that meeting, I would offer suggestions. I would, try to be of help. And that always felt really good to me. And that's the piece I really missed about being in the parish. And so I kind of thought that's what spiritual directors did. And when I started thinking about, wow, maybe I could use this time to do training to become a spiritual director. And maybe that's something I could do once I go back into the parish. But once I started doing the training, got to know the spirituality center, discovered that there was maybe a spot for me to get involved there. After I graduated from the spiritual direction preparation program, I joined the staff as a spiritual director, and that's where I've been for the last 7-8 years.
So what does the word spirituality mean to you, Steve?
Spirituality. At an earlier stage in my life, I would have said that religion and spirituality are synonymous. And if they're not synonymous, then spirituality is wrong or even dangerous. But now I understand religion to be a subset of spirituality. Spirituality is about connection and wholeness. Spirituality, in my mind, is the connection between ourselves and forces bigger than ourselves, the connection between ourselves and what we understand as God or spirit or the universe. Spirituality is about our connection between ourselves and nature. It's about the connection between ourselves and the people around us. We're not isolated in this world. We're part of a whole that's bigger than ourselves. We is bigger than me. Spirituality is about wholeness within ourselves and connecting the various parts of ourselves, our mind, our body, and our spirit, our emotions. When we bring all those together, that's an important part of spirituality.
You know, you mentioned the word isolation when you just answered that. And nowadays, we're all kind of in isolation and our self-imposed isolation with the pandemic that's out there, and we're supposed to shelter in place and all that. How has the time of pandemic changed your understanding, or maybe helped your understanding of spirituality and how people deal with being alone and things like that?
I think my time at home as a father with an autistic child really prepared me for the pandemic, because I was at home with my daughter starting at about 18 months, and my daughter didn't really start speaking until she was 4, and it wasn't clear that she would ever speak. So there was a lot of silence and isolation during that 2-3 year period early on. And so I had to do a lot of that work of just, getting to know myself, living with myself in silence. I think that's what a lot of people are going through right now during the pandemic. So many people have just been so busy with day-to-day life. They just haven't had time to kind of look at the deeper questions like, who am I? What do I want? What am I doing? Is this what I want to be doing? They haven't had time to listen to their emotions. They've oftentimes not listened to their bodies. They've ignored their bodies. Pretty much all the things that we've neglected really come up during this time of silence and isolation. And so that's some of the struggles that people are having. And that's really what spirituality seeks to do, is to address that, to bring all of that isolation into connection, And then too, like the connection between people, whatever people who are living together, whatever issues that have been there between them, it's pretty hard to ignore it right now, because people are just spending so much time with each other. And there's really no place to hide. They have to work it out. I think that's part of spirituality as well, is working out things that are broken, things that need healing.
Do you think we'll get back to a non-broken society? I mean, our society's been broken your whole life, my whole life, all of our life. I mean, society as a whole has been fragmented and broken the entire time. But do you think that once we all get back together, you think the life will be, I'll be sitting around the fireplace singing Kumbaya, or are we going to go back to...
I have hope that things will change, and they will change for the better. I don't think it's going to be a overnight fix, but I also believe that many times in life, once we see something, we can't unsee it. Once we notice something, we can't unsee that. And so, for example, if people were ignoring their bodies and really letting themselves go to pot, and really during this time start to say, I got to take better care of myself. And they start to exercise. They start to First it's kind of painful or whatever, but once they start to recognize, I actually do feel better when I've paid attention to my body. That sort of thing, I think it's going to be hard to unsee that on the other side. Likewise, if they this time repair some relationships, I think those relationships will stay repaired on the other side. The whole idea that we need each other, that's one of the things that's really encouraged me about this time. It really has brought the world together. What's happening in Italy really matters to what's happening here. What happened in China really matters to what here. In that regard, we're all on the same team. I hope on the other side of this, we really do see each other differently.
Are religion and spirituality the same thing, Steve?
I think that religion is the way we practice spirituality, or another way of putting that, religion is how we as a group practice spirituality. It's kind of a agreed upon way that as a group we practice spirituality. But spirituality is kind of a personal thing. How I connect with God, how I connect with nature. Religion is basically a group of people kind of agree on certain ways that they practice their spirituality, certain beliefs that they hold in common. That's kind of my own understanding. It's a subset.
So is it different or weird to be working for a Catholic institution as a Lutheran pastor?
No. A couple of reasons why. First of all, as Lutherans, going back to the beginning, Luther never sought to create a new church. He just saw some things in the Catholic Church that needed to reform. So he always understood himself as a Catholic, just kind of saying, hey, these things need to be reformed. In the decades and centuries that followed Luther, a lot of the things that he saw as needing reform were reformed. So I, like Luther, have always seen myself as valuing the church and the history of the church. The other piece of that is that I really see myself as working for the sisters, the Franciscan sisters of perpetual adoration. And they are just these wonderful women who are so committed to their beliefs. They really do put their beliefs into practice. They really do believe in following Christ, serving the poor, making a difference in the world. To work for them is a tremendous honor. The things I do now are ministry in a very powerful way, and I feel like I get to do things now in a way that are much more powerful than I ever got to do in the parish.
Steve Spilde is one of the spiritual directors at the Franciscan Spirituality Center, and I'm working with Steve putting together these podcasts. Why did you decide to do podcasts, Steve?
This is something I had wanted to do for a long time. I wanted to collect the wisdom of our retired staff at the Franciscan Spirituality Center and collect the wisdom of the retired supervisors in the spiritual direction preparation program. I wanted to record their answers to the question, what is spirituality? Because that is such a big word, it's an important word, and yet I don't know if anyone has a complete answer to that question. So I wanted to hear from them and get that recorded. And podcast became a great way to do that. So that was kind of this, wow, I've always wanted to record them anyway. We could do podcasts with them. And not only would I have those recordings, but I could share them with everybody else.
I'm going to ask you that question. What is spirituality?
I would say spirituality is about connection and wholeness. It's about connection to things within ourselves and outside of ourselves, specifically things that are bigger than ourselves. God is bigger than us. Nature is bigger than us. The whole group of the human family is bigger than us. The communities we live in are bigger than us. Spirituality is about that connection to those realities. And then also, spirituality is about the way we are connected within ourselves. Our physical self is connected to our brains, our intellectual self. That's also connected to our spiritual self, our emotions, mind, body, spirit, being able to get those three things in balance.
I know that our conversation is going to be the first in the series of the podcasts that we're producing, but we have recorded a few of them already. I learned a lot just by sitting and listening and being a part of those conversations, being a fly on the wall. Did you learn anything listening to the
yeah.
first speakers that we had?
One of the things I really enjoyed listening to them was hearing how their understanding of spirituality has evolved throughout their lives. For many of them, growing up, spirituality was about reading prayers, it was about sitting in worship, it was about following the rules. But then as they've gotten older, spirituality has been about connection, connecting with the presence that we call God, and finding where that shows up in their own life, connecting to their own sense of calling, following that sense of who they are, letting that evolve. Been both fun and a privilege to hear them describe that story.
One of the questions that you asked that I was surprised by the answer that I heard a couple of different times is, has your vision of God changed? Has yours?
Yeah, it has. I think my vision of God has become more graceful. Before, I think I had a much more harsh vision of God, a more punishing vision of God, a God who was kind of
vengeful type of God?
Well, yeah, I laugh because I think the Christmas song, Santa Claus is Coming to Town, closely matches my understanding of God. You better watch out. You better not cry. You better not pout. I'm telling you why. Santa Claus is coming to town. He's making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice. Yeah, that's kind of my understanding of God. God was kind of sitting up there with his clipboard, kind of keeping track of everything.
Right.
And I'd get all these messages that God is love and you should come to God in prayer, but yet you didn't want to get too close to that God because you didn't want to open yourself up, because there's I was aware of a lot of bad stuff inside. I was ashamed of. I didn't want that God to see that. Now it's much more of an understanding that God created me. God knows me better than I know myself. These parts sometimes that I label as shortcomings or weaknesses, God gave them to me and there's a purpose to it. And so God can use it for good. And so the trick is to get to know myself, get to know this person that God has created, and really embrace that, care for that, show compassion to myself, because I think that's what God wants me to do.
Tell me a little bit about your work at the Franciscan Spirituality Center.
I'm a spiritual director, which means I sit with people and listen to them as they try to become the person that God has created them to be. So we talk about their life. We talk about what's working, what's not, what might work, what invitations they're receiving, where they sense they're being called to move. We talk about that, and I encourage them. I support them. I have empathy towards them. I encourage people to move forward, to move along. That's what I do as a spiritual director. And then I serve as director of the Spiritual Direction Preparation Program, basically a training program for spiritual directors. And we help people learn to be spiritual directors, learn to sit with others and become better listeners, better companions.
Why don't you tell me a little bit about that program?
Well, it's a 3-year program. People come, during the 3 years, they meet as a group 3 times a year, learn how to be better listeners, and they do some homework. They meet with a supervisor 4 times a year. It's all focused on being better listeners, to be able to sit with someone and listen. But listening is not so much a skill that we teach, rather we help people discover what's blocking them from being a good listener. What I mean by that is, if we're sitting with people and listening to the stories that matter, oftentimes we're listening to people talk about their emotions, what scares them, what makes them sad, what makes them worried. And people are willing to tell us those stories if we'll give them space to share. But if I'm not at peace with my own issues of grief, and I'm talking to you, Bob, and you start to talk about, the loss of a parent and how that made you feel, I'm going to get really uncomfortable in that conversation, and I'm going to change the subject, or you're going to sense my discomfort, and you're going to shut down. You're going to talk about something else. But if that grief is the most important thing that you need to share, I need to be able to sit with you in that. I need to be at least comfortable enough in my own grief so that I can listen to you talk about your grief. So over the course of 3 years, we work with people as they practice listening to others. And we really pay attention to what's coming up for them. Where is the resistance? Where are the unfinished issues that need to be dealt with? That's a lot of the work we do in the spiritual direction program. And so we give people opportunities to practice. We do small group sharing. We teach spiritual tools that support people in this work. That's kind of a brief overview of the program.
What are your thoughts when somebody says, I'm not religious, but I'm spiritual?
I think that a lot of people have that label nowadays. That's becoming a big label, growing day by day. Oftentimes, what people have been offered as religion perhaps wasn't helpful to them. A lot of times what religion offers are, like, for example, the way I was taught religion growing up was, say these prayers, read these sermons. These are a set of beliefs that you have to believe. All that was very much in my head. It was very intellectual, very head-based. But I've come to discover that my own spirituality has a big component of connection to my body. Going for walks is important to me. Being in nature really connects me to a sense of God. If I do my best praying while I'm walking, that doesn't fit well with being in church. I remember as a kid, to sit there, be quiet, be still. That was really hard for me. And so a lot of times I think, my resistance as a kid to being in church wasn't the problem. It was how I had to be while I was in church.
Is that funny? Do you think you became a minister after having those thoughts about?
Yeah, it kind of is. And I think for a long time, there was a lot of ambivalence about being a minister. There was part of me, I think the part of me that had this real spiritual hunger that felt a real draw and connection to serving as a minister. But then there was that other part of me that felt uncomfortable being in church, that felt uncomfortable being so still and, well-behaved. There was some resistance to that. That's one of the things I enjoy now about being a spiritual director is helping people figure out what will help them feel a deeper connection to God, what prayer styles might work best for them. And that might be, say, art. That's not a way that works well for me, but I know a lot of people, their best praying is done while they're being creative, while they're making something or drawing something or writing something. That really connects them inside and makes them feel closer to God's presence.
In your words, what is a prayer?
Prayer is connecting to God. That's another thing that shifted for me. Growing up, my understanding of religion, praying was us speaking to God, saying prayers, prayers that were given to us, say these words, that's prayer. Or praying like, God, give me a puppy, make my grandma well, that sort of thing.
Give me an A+ in his math test.
Yeah, exactly. It was like, God, this is my laundry list of all the things I need. I just want you to know about it. So praying was very much me speaking to God. One of the things I've really learned from the sisters, they practice a contemplative form of prayer. And so what that means is prayer as listening. They will often sit in silence and listen for God to speak to them, paying attention. So oftentimes God speaks to us through our emotions, sometimes through our thoughts, sometimes through the voice of other people, sometimes through nature, just sitting in silence and creating space to hear God speaking to us.
What can we expect, Steve, for the episodes in the following months?
What people can expect is some of the wisest people in this community, sisters and people have been spending a long time learning how they best connect to God in hearing their stories. What's worked for them, what doesn't work for them, times when they struggled, they found healing, they overcame the struggle. People have been walking this journey for a long time, hearing their story of what they've learned along the way.
Steve, what do you hope to learn from the podcast?
One is I hope to learn that I am not alone. I often struggle. I often wonder what it's all about. My expectation is I will hear these people that I respect very much, who are very wise, to talk about their own struggle, talk about lessons they've learned. And I hope and expect that I will resonate with that, say, wow, that's true in my life as well. So I hope to find out that, yes, even when I struggle, I'm still connected. There's still good people out there who can relate to that.
If you have any questions about any of the programs that they offer at the Franciscan Spirituality Center in La Crosse, Wisconsin, we invite you to call us at 608-791-5295. That's 608-791-5295. You can also visit our website at www.fscenter.org. www.fscenter.org. Thank you for listening.